paper's I was trying to unravel before the meditation in the first half. But more generally, we're going to be looking over the next few weeks at some themes from some papers that were written by an order member called Subhuti in consultation and dialogue with Sangharakshita, who's the founder of this order and movement. And they can be found in this publication called Seven Papers, rather prosaically entitled Seven Papers, because in there are seven of these papers that talk about the principles underlying the Triratna Buddhist order and community, the central kind of Buddhist principles underlying this order and community. It's really worth having a look at this book and working your way through the papers. Having said that, they're not an easy read, but I would recommend trying it. It would be great reference, even if you can't work your way through everything. It would be very, very good reference. And we're going to pick up some themes from a paper called A Suprapersonal Force, and then later on we'll look at another paper. But yes, this paper is called A Suprapersonal Force, or Energy Working Through Me. And I'm just going to really give a bit of a commentary on just about 3 paragraphs, or the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of this paper, so I'm not going to be able to do it justice, but somebody else will pick up next week and explore some other themes. And by way of moving into this, what I want to do is just recap a little bit on what I was saying before the meditation in the first half, that when we meditate, we aren't just trying to become a little bit more calm. We're looking for this particular absorption called samadhi, which I guess can be translated, and has been translated, as energized calm. It's a particular absorbed state where all our energies are gathered together, integrated together, available to us, and they're focused. And then they can be channeled. Now, it's a very, very pleasurable state that a practice like the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana can gradually lead us into. Sometimes not so gradually. Sometimes this state of samadhi can just sort of feel like it descends upon you. You sit down and you find yourself absorbed. To be strictly true, it's not a single state. Samadhi has lots of different levels to it, and different dimensions to it. So I'm simplifying very grossly by saying it's a state of absorption that can be translated as energized calm. And much of what we do in the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana is try to gather our energies and learn to focus them, particularly in the mindfulness of breathing. And then in the metta bhavana, what we're also learning to do is to transform negative mental states into something more creative and positive and free-flowing, like metta. All our negative mental states, and by that I mean the painful states of anger, aversion, craving, and the various variants of those two, all of them lock up energy. They lock up energy. And if we're going to liberate that energy, then we have to transform those states into something more creative, like metta, something more free-flowing. So that was a little bit about samadhi. And then what I was saying is that samadhi isn't an end in itself. Even though it's really, really pleasurable, it's not an end in itself. From the Buddhist perspective, it's a springboard, it's a platform from which you can direct your mind to looking at the nature of reality, to looking at, with sort of laser-like energized calm, you look at the nature of reality. In particular, you look at the fact that all experience is constantly flowing, that there's nothing fixed. There's just change. You look at the fact that when you try and fix it, which is what we normally do, when we try and hold on, which is what we normally do, that it causes that's an unsatisfactory experience. And you look at the fact that when you look more closely, there's no fixed entity called me that's independent of the rest of the world. You can't divide experience ultimately up into a me in here and a world out there. When you look really closely at what's going on, you realise that the notion of an independent and substantial self, is a fiction, that it is just that, it's an idea. And when you realise that, not just as a cognitive concept, but as an experience, when you realise that, it's said that there's a breaking of the illusion, a breaking of that delusion. And what is released is creative energy in a blissful, unbounded, liberated state. And if the delusion has broken sufficiently decisively, if you've really broken the delusion, then it's said that you can never fall back. You can never fall back into it. Usually what happens is that you don't break it decisively all in one go. Usually what happens is that you glimpse, yes, that I've been deluded, and then you fall back into the delusion. And then you might at some point later glimpse again, and then you fall back into the delusion. And then you keep glimpsing and falling back. But at some point what can happen is a decisive breakthrough. So that was something of what I was talking about before in the first half. But I want to look a little bit more carefully at how do we move to this breakthrough? How do we move through to the breakthrough where this energy is unleashed in us, liberated within us? So meditation isn't enough. Although it's an essential part of the path, meditation isn't enough. As a foundation, it's not enough. What's needed is a deeper foundation, a firmer foundation, where we're working with the principle of karma in our everyday lives. We need to be working with this principle of karma in our everyday lives. So this principle of karma, or this law of karma, is one set of laws, or it's one law that Buddhism recognizes as operating in the universe, in this thing that we call existence or reality or whatever is going on. There are a number of laws or sets of laws that seem to be keeping order rather than letting everything just descend into chaos. There are a number of laws, natural laws, that are operating. They include laws like physical laws, like the law of gravity and the law of electromagnetism, the laws that physics and chemistry describe. They also include laws of biology and botany that describe life and life processes and how life grows and evolves. There seems to be some sort of natural laws there. They also include laws of our instinctive mind. So when consciousness emerges in animals, animals like ourselves, but also other animals, one of the things that seems to happen is that we have an instinctive mind, that without any conscious thought can do things like breathe and run from danger, and the flight or fight response is a sort of instinct in us, or the laws that govern, just eating and sex, and there's a lot of sort of instinctive mind, and Buddhism classifies that as another set of laws. None of that is irrelevant, but it's not primary to the Buddhist path. The primary thing to the Buddhist path is the next law, which is the law of karma. And like those other more scientific or scientifically recognized laws, the law of karma is seen as a natural law in the universe. It doesn't require a creator entity like a god to create the law of gravity, just so it doesn't require a god to create the law of karma. And it's the law of karma that we need to work with to set the foundation for our meditation practice. One of the reasons that we don't, well, I perhaps should just speak for myself, but one of the reasons that we don't always just find ourselves naturally in a state of samadhi when we sit down to meditate is that we haven't worked yet enough with the law of karma. So does anybody want to say what the law of karma is? We've talked about it a lot in this class, so some of you, for some of you this ought to be familiar, although I realise that it's not always easy to, find the words to sort of formulate it. Does anybody want to have a go?
Present, future, the actions, the effects, the actions that you do, the effects, negatively or positively.
Yeah, the actions that we do now will affect the future. Yeah. Yeah. So it's something around that, isn't it? It's something around that. There is something about the past and the present and our actions in the present governing the future. But I think we can be more precise than that. So in what way does an action now affect our future experience? The law of karma is a bit more precise than that.
Is it what you let out is what you get back? If I let out negative,
Yeah.
I will receive negative. If I let out good, I will receive good.
Yeah. So I think that's getting more precise, because what you've introduced there is the notion of something, either positive actions or negative actions. Buddhism uses a particular kind of language to describe positive and negative, and rather than positive or negative, and rather than good or bad, it uses the words skillful and unskillful. So skillful actions tend to lead to an experience of life that is more fulfilled, more meaningful, and you get a smoother ride of life. Unskillful actions tend to lead to experiences which are sort of less fulfilled, less meaningful, and you get a rougher ride in life. I want to come back to what I mean by a rougher ride or a smoother ride in life. But let's just carry on, first of all, exploring what the law of karma means. So any other advances on that it's something about skillful and unskillful actions and how they affect our experience?
Is something which goes around, come around.
Yeah.
Like if you do something which is not correct in the principles, then that has the negative impact on your life in the future. Yeah.
So that's right. So there's something of that. Although we have to be careful that we don't take it too literally, because sometimes, and Buddhism's fallen prey to this, it becomes so simplistic that it's like an eye for an eye kind of. It becomes like, if I have got angry with somebody, then somebody will get angry with me, or if I've hit somebody, then somebody will hit me, or that's actually too simplistic. The law of karma is much more sophisticated than you get what you deserve. It's not quite like that. But somebody has their hand up, so.
Resetting of the conditions.
Yeah.
So with our thoughts, actions, speech, if we do these skillfully.
Yes.
With setting up the conditions, that something skillfully arises.
Yes. So I think that's getting much closer to, and the other way around. That's true. So did everybody hear that? That one of the things we said that was really important was that if we act skillfully with our actions, but also with our thoughts and with our speech. So that's really important, first of all, because in Buddhism, when we talk about action, it's not just physical action, it's also mental and verbal action. So any conscious thought or conscious speech or conscious physical action, by conscious I mean you've deliberately decided to do it, it's not involuntary. So this is voluntary action of mind or of speech or of body, where there's a will, a conscious will behind it. Any of those actions are called karma. And if they are skillful thoughts or skillful speech or skillful physical actions, then they tend to lead, first of all, to a more expansive mind. The first effect of our actions is on our own consciousness. Yeah? Every time we have a thought or we say something or we do something, the first effect, first in sort of inverted commas, is on our own consciousness. There's an immediate effect on our own consciousness. And skillful actions tend to have a positive effect on our own consciousness in the very next moment. What happens is, from skillful actions, is that consciousness emerges as a little bit more expansive, bright, clear, creative, energized. It emerges as a little bit more flexible, less rigid, and also more connected. You feel a little bit more connected with the world around you, not so shut off. So skillful actions tend to lead to states of mind that are already beneficial. And then, of course, there's an action a consequence in the world, other people and the world around us. Unskillful actions have the opposite effect of creating a mind that is darker, narrower, more isolated, more stuck, sometimes more fragmented, distracted and fragmented, where the energy has got stultified into repetitive patterns, so it's not as creative, and can lead into stagnation and narrowness, confined states of mind. We probably recognise both states of mind, don't we? I mean, there's a spectrum, isn't there, between the most completely expansive, connected state of mind and the most darkest and negative state of mind. There's a spectrum. The Law of Dharma says that we can deliberately choose to move our mind along that spectrum towards a more positive end. So can we just pause just a moment and see if we can more closely define skillful and unskillful? What determines whether an action is skillful or unskillful?
Your intention behind the action.
Yes, your intention behind the action. That defines karma. So that's really important, because in Hinduism, for example, Hindus also talk about karma, but they don't talk in terms of intention. They don't reckon. They basically say that there are certain actions that are always good and others that are always bad. They literalize it. Many theistic religions give you commandments, and they tell you this is good and this is bad. Yeah. Now, Buddhism's much more sophisticated than that. What Buddhism says is, no, it's not that there's always, you can't always judge whether an action is skillful or unskillful from the outside, you have to look also at the intention behind it. So, for example, generosity is seen as a skillful impulse leading to skillful actions. Generosity is a skillful state. But somebody could give you a gift, and it might be that they're being generous, or it might be that their intention is much more, well, what could it be?
They expect something back.
They expect something back, or
Manipulation.
manipulative, yeah. It could be a bribe, couldn't it?
Yeah.
It could be a bribe, more or less overt, more or less subtle kind of bribe. So you can't just tell, or it could be because they want to absolve themselves of guilt. They're feeling guilty and they need to give loads of money to charity or something, which isn't a bad thing. And, you know, I wouldn't want to stop you. But that's not necessarily the most skillful impulse. There's almost a spectrum of skillful. And what determines how skillful something is the intention. Yeah? So Buddhism's a lot more sophisticated. It's saying that you don't just judge from the externals, you also you need to look at the internals. And the main criteria is the intention. So if we are acting from generosity and kindness and awareness, our actions are defined as skillful, or to the extent that we are. If we're acting from the opposites, hatred, self-centeredness, sort of selfishness, and unawareness, blindness, then the actions are going to be unskillful. Yeah? So that's a little definition of skillful and unskillful. And then what I was saying is that yes, that has an effect, first of all, on your own mind. And then it also, of course, has ripples in the world outside. It has ripples in the world outside. It tends to, and you can't always guarantee this, but it tends to colour your relationships with other people. So if you tend to act from kindness and generosity, people will tend to reciprocate. Now, of course, you can't guarantee that, and it won't always be true, but generally you'll come into more warm, friendly communications with more people in the world. Yeah? Remember, awareness is also a principle, so it's not just kindness and generosity in a naive and blind way. You also have to be aware of what's appropriate and when. Yeah? But if you act with awareness and kindness and generosity, you'll tend to have better relations. You only have to test this. I mean, walk down the road. I mean, you have to be careful about it, but walk down the road cultivating metta. Try and cultivate a sense of kindness in your heart as you walk down the road towards people. And notice how your interactions go in the supermarket. You're more likely to have friendly encounters if you are cultivating metta. It's sort of slightly spooky, and it can feel even magical. Yeah. Of course, the converse is true. If you are in a state of, I don't know, fury, anger, resentment, people pick up on that, and they'll tend to avoid you, and sort of wisely. And the effect on your mind will probably be that you feel a bit more isolated. Yeah, and do you see it's a vicious circle that you've set up? Now, of course, I'm not saying that we can always be friendly and kind. I mean, that would be the ideal. This side of enlightenment, none of us is able to always live by that ideal. So again, what Buddhism says is that it doesn't encourage you to get into guilt for falling short. What it says is just bring awareness to your actions and then move more and more in the direction of skillfulness as best you can. Of course you'll fall short. If you fall short, you acknowledge that, you apologize if needs be, you make amends if needs be, you pick yourself up and you try again. Yeah? So it doesn't have room, Buddhist ethics doesn't have room for guilt, for feeling that you're a miserable sinner, that there's no hope for you. All of that is seen as actually just another unskillful, self-indulgent state. And Buddhism would just say, snap out of it, you're a human being, you can do better than that. Next time, of course, okay, you can't do something about the past always, but next time, try a different strategy. Try a different strategy. So that's what karma, the law of karma, is pointing to. And what it's saying is that this natural law you can cooperate with. You can learn to cooperate with. What that will do is generally lead to a more fulfilled and meaningful and smoother life for you. Yeah? Now that doesn't mean, this is where I want to come back to a real important caveat, it doesn't mean that bad things might not happen to you. Yeah? So this is the sort of horrible catch. So bad things do happen to good people. Yeah? Unfortunately. And part of this is that the law of karma isn't the only law operating in the universe. So some things can happen to you that are not to do with your karma. Yeah? Sometimes it's other people, and it's not just if somebody's unpleasant to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you were bad or unskillful in a previous moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It might be nothing to do with you. Or if you, walk out of here and trip up on the way to the tube, well, you could say, okay, well, you could have been more careful, but in a way it might not be nothing to do with you. Yesterday there was this car accident that involved 4 or 5 vehicles just on the corner here, and I didn't see it happen, so I don't know what happened, but some of those cars involved and people involved probably wasn't their fault. Do you see what I mean? They were sort of just driving normally, and something happened. Now that doesn't mean that it was their karma, not necessarily. There are other things, because there are these other laws. If a brick falls on me, it might be that there was unskillful karma, or it might be that some builder up there was being really clumsy and not, so I just happened to be in the wrong place, and the law of gravity says that bricks will fall and they'll hurt. Well, one of the laws of biology will say that. Yeah. So you mustn't get judgmental and simplistic about this law of karma. But what you can guarantee is that if you start behaving more skillfully, it will have an effect over time on your experience, generally. Without working on skillful actions, it's going to be very difficult to sustain samadhi in meditation. Yeah? So this is where we now start to build up the path. We work on our minds outside of meditation through skillful actions, and then within meditation we try and take that positive energy in our mind and turn it into a more absorbed state of samadhi. So sometimes when people aren't able to get into samadhi, it's because they're not paying enough attention to their actions outside of meditation. That's not the only reason, but it can be that we need to be working more on our life outside of meditation. Yeah. So that's cooperating with the law of karma. It really is worth testing this. So you don't take my word for it. Test it. When I do a Buddhism course, an introductory Buddhism course, one of the things I get people to do, it's a 6-week course, and one of the things I ask people to do is to do one kind or generous act a day that they wouldn't have otherwise done were they not on that course. So you could do something similar. You could just say, for a couple of weeks, I'm going to really focus on one, carry on being kind of generous in the normal ways that you might be, but do one extra, deliberate, kind or generous act. It doesn't have to be huge. I'm not saying give away your possessions, all of them, but do just one kind or generous or friendly act a day, simply because you're testing out whether the law of karma works. Yeah? And then notice the effect. And then you could increase it. If it starts to work, you could increase it to a couple or 3, or just work on your habits. Work on how you interact with people. The law of karma is primarily social. It's about how we relate to others. So test it, and then if it works, build on it. Okay, so the law of karma is really critical to leading a fulfilled life. Never mind reaching enlightenment. For any human life that's genuinely fulfilled, people need to be working with the law of karma. So much so that I think it's something that we should be teaching in school. We don't teach how to be happy. We teach all sorts of things. In fact, often it seems like we teach misery. But we could be teaching kids how to genuinely be happy, how to feel fulfilled and connected. And it isn't really through getting, the iPhone 7 or whatever it is. That won't, it might have a fleeting effect, but a few days in, few hours in, probably before you've left the Apple store, your habitual states of mind will return. Yeah. So we ought to be teaching everybody that there is a path to genuine fulfillment, and the law of karma is a secret. But it's not the end point. It's not the end point by a long way. So there's another law that operates in the universe, and that's the law of Dharma. Yeah? So law is a translation of a word called niyama. So the law of karma, you could say, is the karma niyama, and the law of Dharma is the Dharma niyama. So this law of Dharma, or the Dharma niyama, processes this law and the processes that operate under that law. They come into play particularly when, through practice, maybe through samadhi and through ethics, sila, you've seen through this delusion, this illusion, that there's a real fixed substantial entity called self, called me, that's separate from the rest of the world and is substantial in that it's fixed and really exists. When you see through that, some other law starts to operate through you and in you, and that's this Dharma niyama. And it's like a force or an energy. That's how it's experienced. It's like there's a force or an energy that somehow it feels like it's coming through you. That's only a way of talking, because it's not necessarily really external, but it can feel like it's coming through you, and it's an energy or a force that leads to more and more self-transcendence. So what I mean by that is that when you have seen through this illusion that I don't exist as a fixed and separate entity, that the notion of I is a construct, it doesn't mean that you stop wanting things. It doesn't mean that all volition disappears. So what happens is that a new type of wanting arises in you. But it's a wanting that is not self-referential. It's not egotistical. It's not about you. It's a wanting that is more about helping to alleviate suffering in the world. It's more about, Brian, I want you to stay awake. So do stay awake.
Yes, I am listening.
Good. It's a wanting about alleviating suffering for others in the world. And that feels like it's not sort of self-willed. The notion of self you've seen through, but there's still a willing, and it doesn't feel like your will. It feels like there's a will that's bigger than you, that's working through you, and that will is quite naturally wanting to help others, help in the world, help other people around you. So that will operates under this law called the Dharmanight. Yeah? It's the will that operates when somebody has glimpsed the truth of the Buddha's teaching for themselves. And it's said that there comes a point when you've seen the truth decisively, so you can no longer fall back into believing that there is a real separate entity called me. And from that point onwards, this Dharmaniyama process becomes more and more dominant in your life. It's not that you immediately then always act from kindness and generosity. You still probably have habits that draw you back. But the dominant force in your life is this force of self-transcendence. And it's said that inevitably that will lead you to enlightenment. Almost without you having to do anything. It'll lead you beyond yourself into an enlightened state. So the whole of the Dharma life is about these two laws. First of all, it's about the law of karma, and then it's about the law of Dharma. The law of Dharma won't become dominant in your life until you've worked with the law of karma first. You have to work with the law of karma to create a mind that is bright enough, concentrated enough, positive enough, selfless enough to be receptive to the truth. When our minds are not in those states, we're not going to be able to break through the delusion of egotism. So you need to create a mind that is, Maitreya Bandhu refers to it as a fit mind. You need a fit enough mind to see the truth. And then when you see the truth, it's as if something else arises and works through you. I guess in a theistic tradition you'd call it grace. In Buddhism it's seen as a natural law. It's seen as a natural law. That process of that natural law of the Dharma is personified in Buddhism in images of beautiful, radiant beings made of light. They're the archetypal bodhisattvas. They're, as it were, personifications of this Dharma Niyama law. They're mythical, archetypal beings that are working to alleviate suffering in the world. They're personifications of compassionate activity. They're this force, this energy personified. So let me just pause there and see if there are any questions about what I've said so far, this law of karma and the law of dharma, karma and dharma niyamas. Yeah.
So there are quite clearly a lot of people out there in the world that, if you will take advantage of generosity.
Yeah.
Quite, and is it, sometimes you feel that, like, well, obviously you don't want to be taken advantage of, horrible feeling to be taken advantage of. But
Yeah.
also perhaps as well, even if you were looking broader than that,
Yeah.
you're not helping those people by allowing them to take advantage of you.
Mm, mm,
It's sort of, how do you skillfully
mm,
approach those kind of
mm,
people?
mm.
I'm sure most of us have encountered them at some point in our lives.
I think you have to use your intelligence. So Buddhism isn't, again, it's not saying, it's not giving you a rule saying always give away everything that you can. It's not saying that. It's saying use your intelligence coupled with an impulse of generosity. So then you have to say what's appropriate when. What's appropriate when. And sometimes it might not be appropriate to give. Also, I guess what it would say is that if you give, you're trying to give more and more freely without any expectation of whether it will be appreciated or not. So if it's a completely unconditional, generous act, then you'll never feel that you've been taken advantage of, because somebody might not appreciate it, but your generosity wasn't dependent upon that. Also, Buddhism is quite clear that it's not about becoming a pushover. It's not about losing any sense of your own boundaries or limits or initiative. Sorry, it's like you keep the initiative. You choose that I'm going to act from kindness or generosity, and then there's less likely to be resentment. Sometimes it's because we don't quite have the initiative. So somebody asks us to do something, and if we feel like we have no choice, like we feel for whatever reason that we've got to say yes and do it, then we've lost the initiative and we're likely to end up feeling resentful. Okay? So Buddhism isn't, when I say that you see through the delusion of self, a lot of the karma niyama work is to do with creating actually a stronger self. It's about creating a self that knows himself or herself well enough to be able to relate with initiative without losing personal responsibility. So that's really important. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, some of these things are kind of slightly grey areas. How would you suggest going into your body, working out whether you feel pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? Questioning that, because you could feel pleasant for the wrong reason, going into deep, and then and then you can firstly measure karmic reaction straight away because you can feel the sense, the warmth in your body. But also, that that act is going to be more likely to be skillful.
I think what you're talking about is awareness, mindfulness, and it's really important to develop mindfulness so that you do know when you're acting skillfully or not. Without any mindfulness, without any awareness, we wouldn't even know what our intention was. Yeah? We would just sort of somehow act without really knowing why I'm acting. on sort of automatic. So mindfulness teaches us, first of all, yes, to recognize where is our action coming from. So I think what you describe is right. It's just that sometimes there isn't time to do that. To go right into the body and see if it feels pleasant and unpleasant. Sometimes it has to be a bit more immediate than that. And I think that with practice, you just become a bit more accustomed to acting with awareness, without needing to pause too much and analyse how you feel and where it's coming from. Yeah? Because otherwise it would slow life right down and become rather stilted. So sometimes you just have to act. What I would say is that if you do want to do this exercise this week, act and then do what Brian's suggesting, which is to notice what the effect of that action was on your mind and your body. How did it feel afterwards? Yeah? See if you can do that. Act and then see how it is. So awareness, mindfulness, is key to knowing ourselves enough to know what our intentions are. You know how somebody can be passive aggressive is what comes to mind, without knowing that they're being passive aggressive, or somebody can be manipulative without knowing they're being manipulative. Somebody can feel that they're being genuinely friendly when actually underneath that friendliness there's something else going on that isn't so nice. But they're not always aware of that. That's because there isn't enough mindfulness for them to know what really is the motivation. So one of the first things that meditation starts to teach us is give us more self-awareness so that we know what our motivations are. And then we can start to choose which motivations do we want to act from and which do we want to ignore. Yeah, think.
Going back to the superpersonal force and this idea that if one acts enough with kind of karmic intention and then that fits into the Dharmic niyama, then it almost becomes self-propelling, the momentum keeps going.
Yeah.
I was thinking in terms of will, as you were talking about, and because I'm from creative background, and thinking that sometimes it seems that there's a will and a need that's kind of operating probably slightly outside of oneself.
Yeah.
To kind of constantly express or feeling the need to kind of get that out in kind of ways. And I wondered quite how that sits aside, I suppose, the kind of path to enlightenment.
Yeah. So I think you've said several things I want to pick up on. The first one, before I address the question of the will, the first one that I think I just need to make a bit clearer is that, yes, we work with karma, but no matter how skillful we become, that won't necessarily lead to the Dharma niyama stuff, processes flowing. What is also needed is insight. What's needed is a reflection on the nature of reality, on the nature of what we call self. So on the basis of a very positive mind, we then reflect. It's when the reflection becomes an insight, an actual experience into the nature of things, that the Dharma niyama stuff kicks in. That's important because Buddhism says ethics on its own is not enough. Some people are naturally very, very kind and generous. That doesn't mean that insight has arisen or that enlightenment is guaranteed. Yeah? But the second thing you said is that yes, there's this kind of will, and in the paper Subhuti terms it as a supra-personal force, a supra personal force. And how does that relate to a sort of creative impulse, where sometimes it feels if you're doing something creative, something else comes through you? Well, I'd say it relates really well to that. It is of that nature. It is of that nature. And Bhante Sangharakshita puts a great deal of emphasis on the spiritual life, the Dharma life, is a creative life. And when we're working with our minds, that is a creative act. So if you're also involved in a more traditional creative pursuit, literary or artistic or whatever it is, that is completely aligned with what you're trying to do in the spiritual life. It can be completely aligned. The only caveat there is that some creative people, well, there's this whole debate, isn't there, about you can have creative geniuses who aren't very nice people. Although there's a debate as to whether that's actually possible or not, whether any real creative act doesn't have an ethical component to it. That in ordinary society we could have that sort of debate. From a dharmic perspective, you're trying to work on the moral dimension of your consciousness. But yes, the creative act can feel like there's something beyond you working through you. And that's definitely analogous to what this Dharmaniyama suprapersonal force will feel like. Yeah. It's not even just always a creative act. I think sometimes even in appreciating something creative, like just in appreciating beauty, something of this can happen. Yeah. So that could be beauty in nature, or beauty in art, or beauty in others. If you just are appreciating beauty, what can happen is that for a while, provided you're not grasping after it, so it's better in nature and art, provided you don't get into craving, what happens is that for a while, it's as if your normal egotistical mode is suspended. And then it can feel like another sort of experience can come through you. We talked of being transported, don't we? We talked of moments of rapture, of heightened experience, where you feel suddenly connected, lifted up, bigger, expansive, joyous. I guess it happens when people first fall in love, that sort of heightened experience. The trouble, I mean, in a way, that's beautiful, but the trouble with falling in love is that it soon becomes, well, even if it isn't already right at the beginning, it soon becomes about grasping, about wanting something for yourself. In this case, another person that you're going to pull towards yourself and preferably turn into an attachment to yourself, or even part of yourself, part of your identity. So all you're doing then is shoring up your ego identity. But perhaps there's a time when you're sort of freshly in love, where it's a bit more innocent than that, and the world looks radiant, and you haven't yet got into the petty jealousies and squabbles and do they love me back and da-da-da-da. It hasn't gone wrong. So you're safer off. You're better off with beauty in art and nature. Although, who am I to speak, as it were? I can't stop you. I can't stop myself either. So, but yes, beauty in it can be a transporting experience. So I'll maybe just bring things to a close now. What we've just looked at is, in a way, the whole of the Dharma life. I've given you a sort of telescopic view of the whole of the path. We've talked about, in a way, we've talked about the 3 stages of the path, which are ethics, meditation, and wisdom: sila, samadhi, and prajna. So sila, ethics, I've said, is aligning ourselves and cooperating with this law of karma to create a more positive, bright, expansive, flexible consciousness. Samadhi is meditation meditation which leads you into absorption and builds on that expansive mind to create even more expansivity. On the basis of a very positive, expansive, creative mind, you can then start to reflect in meditation on the Dharma, particularly on the nature of existence, the nature of self. That can then lead to an opening up to a whole new level of experience that's called insight. When that happens, it's as if the delusion, it's like the veil falls away. Even if it's only momentarily, it falls away. When that veil falls away, it creates room for a new type of energy, which feels like it's not personal, it feels like it's not egotistical, it feels like it's not yours, and yet it comes through you, and it's always an energy of compassion, of love, of connectedness that wants to act for good in the world. When that Dharma Niyama force, that Dharma Niyama process becomes dominant in your life, then you're on your way to enlightenment. And enlightenment would be when there's nothing else left but this energy that's flowing through you. It's as if you've just become a vessel for this compassionate energy. And then that's said to be a life that's completely fulfilled. And you've reached, as it were, your human potential, which is, in a way, our own birthright. So that's an overview of what we're trying to do. So let's leave it there for this week. And yeah, do try to just work on cooperating with this law of karma in your everyday life by trying to deliberately act with kindness and generosity, and then notice what effect that has. Yeah? Thank you very much.